Hi everyone, it's me, Ms. V. It's morning, so good morning and happy Thanksgiving. Ooh, time to eat. But also, do you ever talk about in your family how Thanksgiving commemorates this dark history that we have of, just the beginning of taking away Native American land? Well, we are going to talk about land today, actually. So one of a few of you actually had this idea of, hey, why don't you cook something and also give us a history lesson at the same time? So while I'm not going to go into Thanksgiving and all of that, I mean, we've talked about it in class before, right? Hopefully you remember. But we're going to talk about a more recent example of a historical figure who fought to get land back from the American government. So I'll do that, and yeah, tell you about Reyes Lopez Tijerina. So let's do this. So using the semi-sweet chocolate and the dark chocolate will give the cookies a fancy, rich flavor, unlike regular chocolate chip cookies, Let's not use chocolate chips. Let's step it up a little bit. So what was I going to tell you? Oh yeah, the story of Reyes Lopez Tijerina. And I had to do a presentation on him the other day. So he's fresh in my mind, and then, I didn't really think about it earlier, but I was like, oh yeah, he does have to do with, like, his whole thing was about getting land back, and, Thanksgiving, we're reminded of how that's what the relationship between the English colonists and the Native Americans consisted of. First, hey, help us survive, and then, oh, we're gonna take whatever we can from you. Yay, love history. America's great because America's good. I'm just kidding. So anyway, I keep going back to Thanksgiving, you guys, to that. I just was reading the numbers earlier, and was it over billions of acres of land were taken from Native Americans by the U.S. government between the years of 1774 and 1887. And currently, as we know, there's Indian reservations, but today that the number or the amount of land that they own is like down to 56 million acres, which, I mean, still a lot, but that's not the principle here. It's something like 56 million acres of land, but it's in government trust, which means whatever decisions the tribes make, they have to be approved by the government before they even do anything about it. I need some plates for the chips. So that's the way the cookie crumbles. That was semi-sweet. Okay, cool. Get this beautiful chocolatey mess. So, I mean, that's a big number. Anyway, for the fourth time, Reyes Lopez Tijerina. Have you ever heard of him? I might throw some pictures up when I'm editing the video so you could see. We'll see. Okay, so anyway, Reyes Lopez Tijerina was Mexican American. He was born in 1926 in southern Texas. Where is the other candy bar? I have two of these. Where's? Got it. Bam. Okay, anyway. Reyes Lopez Tijerina was born in 1926 in southern Texas. So just a couple of years before the Depression, his parents were migrant workers. So growing up, he was used to moving around to look for work, you know, following the seasons, which we know about that here because we are an ag community and there are lots of migrant workers here. But he had 6 siblings. It was a big family that he was part of. And during the Great Depression, the poverty really hit them hard because they have such a big family, and because it was tough to find work just for everyone in general. So, oof. So yeah, he didn't, because he moved around so much, he didn't really get an education like the one that we are so grateful to receive today. Free education for everyone. Woo-woo. I'm not talking about college people, but by his own estimate, he only received about a 3rd grade classroom education. Everything else was just you know, from his dad's stories, from his mom, and then his experiences growing up, talking to other people and hearing their stories. And really it was his family telling stories that opened his eyes to the oppression of the Mexican American community, and even, you know, Native Americans, people of color. He was just like, wow, the government's really messed up, and he had that ingrained in his mind from an early age. So growing up during the Great Depression, it really proved formative, you know, in the person that he ended up becoming and the direction that his life took. He was also very religious. His mom was a very religious, devoted Catholic, and he really looked up to her. He saw her as a really strong, influential figure, and he believed that was due to her faith. So he definitely looked up to his mom more than he looked up to his dad. He saw his dad as the weaker one of the family, of the parental unit. But something really tragic happened, and Reyes' mom died when he was only 7 years old. Now by that time, I mean, he had a really close bond with her. Like I said, he really looked up to her. She was very religious, and that proved to be instrumental in his own religious education. Like he was very religious because she was very religious, and he had this dream when he was 4 years old, and there was like a snake in the dream. And anyway, he told his mom about it. Dark chocolate now. He told his mom about it, and she validated that dream. She was like, oh my gosh, you need to tell everyone about this. And so she would always encourage him to tell neighbors and friends a story about this dream that he had. So he started to form this image of himself as like, oh, he's a special person. There's some kind of divine in him, that God is talking to him through these visions, and that's going to come back later. So that's enough of his early life. Now let's move on to the later, sooner than later. Okay, and this is dark chocolate. So we've got semi-sweet chocolate chips and dark chocolate chips. I'm gonna have to probably get some small chunks going here. We like big chunks, or do we do little chunks? Anyway, so when Reyes got married, he and his wife set out to evangelize. So they set out on the road, and they traveled across the American Southwest under the Church of the Assemblies of God. By this time, Reyes Lopez was a preacher. He's a Presbyterian preacher. So he was trying to, spread the word of God and hopefully reach people to convert. So he was out doing that. And then in 1955, he decided to establish a religious commune called the Valley of Peace. So he and his wife went to Arizona. That's where they started the Valley of Peace. And this community was supposed to be, you know, rooted in their faith, but also self-sufficient, right? So the kids were supposed to be homeschooled there, be taught by the families, the parents, because they believed that the government was doing a terrible job educating their children, that they weren't teaching them their true history. They were forcing them to accept the Anglo ways, etc., etc. All right, so in 1957, a couple of years after establishing the Valley of Peace, Reyes goes to New Mexico, and he meets some people there, some like elders in the community, and they start telling him about their struggle to get their land back. So they used to have a lot of land. This is going back to before the Mexican-American War, you guys. So New Mexico at that time was part of Mexico. People had land that they held together as a community, and they were called ejidos. This communal land, so that they used for farming and, you know, so that they could live off of their land. They were self-sufficient in those times. Well, after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, as you know, the territory of New Mexico and that of California and Texas and Arizona, etc., became part of the United States. Now, what was to happen to the land that people claimed? Well, there was part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that said, you know, if you chose to remain in the United States, then the U.S. government would honor your land grant, your claim to the land. So people who stayed expected really to not have anything change. That they would still own their land, that they'd still live as they had before. But unfortunately, there were a lot of squatters, Anglo squatters encroaching in on their land. The government was taking people's land, saying that they didn't have enough evidence to prove that the land was theirs. And that goes back to, you know, papers being destroyed and like fires and things like that. People having made verbal agreements that could not be, you know, they couldn't hold up in any court of law. So unfortunately, a lot of people had their land taken away because they supposedly could not produce enough evidence that it was theirs. So you have a lot of angry New Mexicans, or Nuevo Mexicanos. Fast forward back to 1957. This is the first time that Tijerina is hearing about this, and he's like, what's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? This is an injustice. And that night, after he heard these old men talking about how their way of living was, you know, in danger, and that they were in danger because of the government's greed, he had a dream. He had a vision. And in this vision, there were 3 mystical figures that appeared to him. And they scooped him up and they took him over the heavens. And they showed to him a majestic land. And they handed him a silver key. And they said, this is going to be yours one day. And you will reign over this land. And you are the only person who can do this. Okay. So basically in his dream, you've got a bunch of like mystical people telling Reyes that he's the chosen one. That he's the one who has to get their land back. And he's the only one that can do it. So when he wakes up the next day, this gives his life direction. I mean, it totally changes the way in which he lived. Because he saw himself as... The way he saw it was that God told him, you're the only one that could do this, and I need you to do this for me. Like, I need you to get justice for these people. Interesting, right? Very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna take a break so I can heat up the butter. Okie dokie. Jeez, this video's already so long, so I probably won't even show you the apple part. Anyway, where did I leave off in the story? Sugar, salt, butter. Okay, so let me get my sugar. Let me get this figured out. Okay. Alright, so he has this vision. It's 1957. Reyes is 30 years old. Who knows? Is he having a midlife crisis? No, just kidding. Just kidding. But he was ready to fight for these people. Now, remember I told you how much education he had had. Only about a 3rd grade formal education. So he had to go and learn about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And he took a few trips actually over the course of those early years. He made a lot of trips to Mexico to read the actual archives, to hold the documents in his hand and read what they said. 'Cause he was a strong believer in, if you know the history, then you can't lose, because history's on our side. You see, here's the evidence that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo says that this land is our land, right? And the government had no right to take it away. Well, wishful thinking, right? The government found a way to make it so that the law worked in their favor, and everybody knows that. Okay, hopefully I counted right. That's kind of why you don't talk while you do that, but I think I got it. And the salt. I do not have salt. I never put salt in my food, so like once in a while I'll put salt in my food. I only have this one. Well, that'll do, donkey. That'll do. ¿Cuántas? How much? 2 teaspoons. Okay. Oh wow, this doesn't even fit. Okay, let me get the smaller one. 2 teaspoons of salt. One. I'm making 2 batches here, so that's why it's so much. Okay. So Reyes Lopez, he goes to Mexico City. He does all this research. He's like, I'm the one who's been appointed. I'm gonna get your land back. Great, right? And then he forms in 1962. So he's, by then it's been 5 years after he had that vision. He's arming himself with education. Haha, so I tell you, school's important. Knowledge is power, right? He empowered himself by teaching himself the law and what it actually said. And he was going to use that to his advantage. So, in 1962, he formed the Alianza Federal de Mercedes, which translates to the Federal Alliance of Land Grants. It's in the name. Their job was they were going to advocate for people to get the land that was, quote, stolen from them, that they're going to get it back. And this is in the 1950s and 60s, you guys. So, and he's basing his argument on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It was 1848. Someone in my class, after I gave the presentation, asked, well, why didn't they just get over it? The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was a long time ago. They lost. Why couldn't they face that? And it's like, well, if you had something that was taken away from you, and not rightfully so, wouldn't you want to fight for it? I would think so. Put that butter in there. So people were on his side. And at its peak, the Alianza had over 20,000 members. So, you know, he was really garnering attention. Again, this wasn't nationwide, this was just in New Mexico. So he was becoming well known in the Southwest. He didn't become nationally known in the Chicano movement even until 1967, a few years later, with the courthouse raid. Let's go back, let's rewind a couple of years. 1965, the occupation of Echo Park Amphitheater at Kit Carson National Forest. So Tijerina and the Alianza had said, you know, they claimed that the National Forest was land that the government had taken away from Nuevo Mexicanos who had a rightful claim to it. So they staged a sit-in or an occupation of part of the park. And really what they were hoping to get out of this action was they wanted to be arrested. They wanted the government to put them in a courtroom so that later on the Alianza could turn the tables on them and put the government on trial, saying, okay, if you're not going to listen to us when we like do peaceful protests or, you know, send out brochures, flyers, whatever, things like that, then we're going to make you listen to us. And we're going to make you listen to us in the courtroom. It didn't work. They even tried to arrest 2 park rangers. That was not a successful mission. But in 1967, Tijerina and the Alianza got a lot more radical, and that is what drew national attention. Let's see, egg, vanilla, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Okay. So 1967, you're like, okay, you've said it a few times. What's happening? In 1967, Tijerina and the Alianza, they went too far in trying to make a citizen's arrest. So Tijerina was of the mindset that, hey, if his people's rights were being violated, then you get the eggs. If his people's rights were being violated, then he was within his rights to make a citizen's arrest of the people who were violating those rights. So what had happened was the Alianza was going to hold a peaceful rally in New Mexico. I forgot exactly where it was. I think it was in the same town of the courthouse in Rio Arriba, New Mexico, like northern New Mexico. But the district attorney, his name was David Sanchez, he blocked the rally from happening. So when the members of the Alianza, there was supposed to be hundreds of people there, when they started showing up to hold their rally, there were police there waiting for them. There were roadblocks, and there were police there waiting to arrest members of the Alianza. They didn't really have reason to arrest them when they were going to make a peaceful rally. So they just started all out arresting people. They ended up getting, I think, 8 Alianza members. Tijerina was not one of them. He was able to get away. He hid for a couple of days, and then he was like, I want revenge. He wanted revenge because he saw that as a huge injustice on the part of the government. Yummy. Okay, we're good. We're good with that. So, sorry I get distracted by delicious cookie dough. Let's take out the whisk. We're getting all floury up in here. So, anyway, 8 Alianza members are arrested. They're going to be brought to court for arraignment. And Tijerina decides, you know what? We're gonna show up at the courthouse at at the arraignment, we're going to get our members back because they shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. And we're going to arrest the DA for doing us dirty like that. So they plan to raid the Tierra Amarilla courthouse, and this is June 5th of 1967, which Reyes Tijerina calls the day of God. This is what kind of makes him look a little bit crazy. How much? 1 1/4. Okay. Well, let me do the math here, because you can't mess up flour. You shouldn't. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 1 1/4. Go 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2 1/4. Okay. So I'll take the wet. I'll take the flour and the baking soda. 1 teaspoon of baking soda. You know, sometimes I just can't multitask. This is working. I'm not strong enough. Oh gosh. Okay. That should be enough. A teaspoon of baking soda. Perfect. Don't want to fold it too much. Okay. So it's 1967. Tijerina plans to raid the courthouse to make a citizen's arrest of the DA to get back at them for arresting Alianza members and not allowing them to hold their peaceful rally. Well, the courthouse raid turns violent. So the arraignment was held earlier. They changed the time. So by the time that Tijerina and Alianza members got there to make the citizen's arrest of the district attorney, they weren't there anymore. They were gone. They had already had the arraignment. But they went into the courthouse looking for him. They were armed. I think a couple of people got shot. Some people got beaten up. It was not a pretty picture. I mean, and this garnered national attention. You had the National Guard being called. It was all over the news. It was breaking news when there was the 6-day war going on. They broke coverage of that to talk about what was happening in New Mexico. So that really elevated Reyes Lopez Tijerina onto the national stage in the context of the Chicano movement, which was happening at the same time. If you don't know what the Chicano movement is, they had this romantic idea of all the land that used to belong to Mexico. So kind of similar to Reyes Lopez Tijerina, but different. And then again, his was more about New Mexico, hey, we need to get justice for these people whose land was stolen. Whereas Chicanos were yes, Azatlan, that was the ancestral land. No one had the right to have it except for us, And Chicanos looked up to Reyes Lopez Tijerina because they were wow, he's such a badass. Look what he just did, and he's trying to get the land. And so they saw him as a revolutionary, as a hero. People wrote corridos about him, and he heard one of them as he was doing time in jail. He was a fugitive after that. He was on the run for, I think, like 18 months, and then he turned himself in. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but he served 2. They put him in the federal prison for the mentally deranged, is what it was called, in, I think it was in Springfield, Missouri. So you see, he did time there, and he wrote about the effects of the antipsychotic drugs that they gave him, and again, he wrote about how the government was oppressive and a lot of not fun stuff. But he cried. He wrote about, like, he talked about how he wept when he heard the corrido for the first time, because it just, like, made it all worth it for him. By his eyes, he was doing what was right. It didn't matter that violence had to happen in order for that, for justice to be achieved. He saw himself as on the right side of history, and as most people who are, are radical do, that's how they justify their actions, right? That they're on moral relativism, kind of. So that was the height of Reyes Lopez Tijerina's career. After he did time in jail, the government had a close eye on him. They told him that he could not lead the Alianza. He could not be involved in Alianza activities for 5 years. So he stepped down as the leader. And he never did anything as radical as the Tierra Maria courthouse raid ever again. He didn't stop working, but he just went and did normal things. Like, he went to conferences and he talked about racial harmony. And a lot of Chicanos who were super radical saw him as they kind of saw that as a betrayal. It's like, what the heck? You were the revolutionary, you were the bandido, you were the hero that was fighting against the government. You stood up to the man and said, we're not gonna sit here and take it. We want our land back. And now all of a sudden you're just talking at conferences. Like, you're not taking action. So he fell into historical oblivion. He disappeared from the limelight, and he lived out the rest of his life pretty quietly, moving back and forth between Texas and Mexico, actually. I think he was there for a decade, and then he came back. He lived out his last few years in El Paso. He had diabetes, and he had a lot of complications from that, but he wasn't as active as he could be, with the disease that he had, which limited his quality of life. But he still watched the news, and he still, he did interviews every now and then a couple years, I think it was about a year before he died, he started to make a documentary. Or someone reached out to him, and they were interviewing him for that. And he wanted to set the record straight. He wanted to tell everyone, hey, they called him King Tiger, and that's the name of the documentary. They called me King Tiger. Me llamaban King Tiger. And he was like, the government painted me as a communist, and the media destroyed my reputation because that's what they want to do. I'm the one speaking the truth, and they don't want people to know that. So of course they're gonna do a character assassination on me. So in this documentary, he really wants to have the last word on who he was and why he did what he did and all of that stuff. So he's a really interesting guy, and I'm happy to have been able to learn more about him. It's not something that's in mainstream curriculum. Wonder why. So look into that. Read his autobiography. I think you would be... It's very easy to read. He writes in colloquial language, nothing fancy. It's like reading a diary. His ideas were just like, wow. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You can see the radical in there, but at times he also made sense. He was a complicated person. Alright, my favorite part is to put in the chocolate chips. Let's do a little bit at a time. A little bit of dark chocolate. And a little bit of light chocolate. Didn't wanna be the one. I love chocolate. I love chocolate so much. I think these chunks might be a little too big. I did alright with the dark chocolate. I don't know why people don't really like dark chocolate. How much it's so good. This video is already gonna be super long, and I just I have trouble with that. I should edit the videos down to be even shorter, but I can't. I have trouble discriminating of oh, this is what's gonna be most important, or oh, I don't want to leave that out, that's so cool. But I mean, whatever, it's for me, it's not for anyone else. If you want to watch, that's cool, but this is for me. Oh yeah. Oh, you know what, I want to give a shout out. Now we're talking about viewers and whatnot. Break that. Break this too. See some big pieces in there. I want to give a shout out to Hermelinda and Kylie. The other day when I was at the grocery store shopping for this stuff, my cashier was a former student of mine, and she was just updating me on how college was going, and being an adult is not all kicks and giggles, and she's saying, I still watch your YouTube channel, I see how you travel and all this. And I was like, what? That's so cool. Amazing. So hello Melinda, if you're watching, if you're still watching. Hello to my other 5 loyal subscribers and viewers. How you doing? I'm just having fun here making these cookies, and oh my gosh, I need to mix it with my hands and then let it chill. And no. No, I got cookie dough in my pants. I washed my hands. In a nice little ball. Pop. I don't remember which one was semi-sweet and which one was not. Okay. Wash my hands. Cling wrap, yeah. Ooh, a new box. What a nightmare. There we go. We're getting somewhere, right? Oh yeah. Ooh, I found it. I don't know what the slogan is for Glad, but if I did, I would totally say that right now. It's like, don't be sad. Get Glad. With Glad plastic clean wrap. So put that in the fridge, let it rest. Es unas 9:30. And now I have a mess to clean up.